Well, today is September 11th, 2019. 18 years ago today, our lives changed forever. Our way of life changed forever. It's a day that I will never forget, a day that so many people will never forget, especially those affected by it in terms of their family members being lost. And then subsequently, in years to come, those people that were helping at Ground Zero, helping with the rescue recovery efforts that went on right after these horrific attacks happened, contracted illnesses, became very sick, and eventually died. And there are still people living with sickness. So it affected everybody in a way that before it happened was unfathomable to all of us. And I got to thinking today that there is an entire generation that has now grown up in what I can only describe as a new world that has no idea what it was like growing up before September 11th, 2001. Because either A, they weren't born yet, or they're too young to remember that things like this and what happened that day didn't happen in our country. We didn't get attacked like that. That's stuff that happened somewhere else. That never happened here. And I wanted to share my thoughts about that day and how it affected me on a very personal level in a lot of ways. And especially being from New York, especially working in New York City at the time. I worked a few miles away. I worked at that particular time on 26th Street between 6th and 7th Avenue on that day. Just so happened that on September 11th, 2001, I had a scheduled day off. So I would not have been in the city that day regardless. But I did go to work at that time. My hours were from 3 p.m. to midnight. So even if I was supposed to work that day, I would not have made it into the city. And I want to share my thoughts and exactly how I found out about it. And it's a moment in our history that if you lived through it, you remember where you were that day. You remember what you were doing that day. You remember how you first found out. And I remember waking up that morning somewhere around 9 o'clock, I guess it was, something in that range, maybe a little earlier than that. It was somewhere in between the time the first plane hit and the second plane. And I had a habit back then. I'd go to sleep with the TV on. And I'd watch Nick at Night. Every night I was watching the old TV shows. So I'd have Nick at Night on, and I'd fall asleep, and I'd wake up in the morning to Nickelodeon, normal programming, which was usually Blue's Clues. I always woke up to Blue's Clues. So I wake up that morning to Blue's Clues, like I always did. And I looked at the clock, and like I said, it was somewhere in between the time of the first plane hitting and the second plane hitting. And I remember thinking, oh, I got to turn to channel 11. I got to watch me some Jerry Springer. That's what I'd watch in the morning, Jerry Springer. Remember, it's 2001. Springer was still, kind of a hot commodity back then. So let me turn on a little Jerry Springer. And I turn to channel 11, and to my surprise, I see a smoking World Trade Center tower. And I was just in disbelief. Oh my God, what the hell happened? And I'm hearing the newscasters talking, and they're saying, well, a plane hit the tower. Now, my first thought is some amateur pilot flying like a Cessna didn't know what they were doing and hit the building. That's my first thought. Of course, at that point, not really thinking logically about how, like, the damage that was done and a Cessna wouldn't have done all that kind of damage. I mean, it's something that you never thought of, like a plane hitting a building. So I remember thinking, wow, like some idiot was flying his plane and hit the building. And I'm watching this footage and they're talking about the Trade Center is burning, it's on fire. How are the people that are above it going to get out? Because they must be stuck. Did they go to the roof? Can they do a rescue from the roof with helicopters? I mean, all these things are being talked about. And this is all happening live, right? And then all of a sudden, you see an explosion come out the side of the other building. Because the angle that they were showing on TV was an angle from the other side. So you didn't see the plane, the second plane, hit the building. You only saw the explosion come out the other side. So I distinctly remember them saying, oh my God, there seems to have been an explosion in the other building, an unrelated explosion in the other building. And now I'm going, what the hell is going on? Still not thinking anything more than, is there some sort of air traffic controller problem? Is the radar going crazy? Is something happening with the radar of these airplanes that they're crashing into buildings? What is going on here? How is this happening? Still not putting it together that it's anything more than that. And I'm watching this unfold, and the towers are now, they're both on fire and smoking, and it's just this surreal image. I mean, I grew up with that skyline of New York, with the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building. I mean, that was a staple of New York in my time. And now I'm watching these two iconic buildings on fire. And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? And then you hear a report about hijacking. The planes were hijacked. And you think, wow, some crazies hijacked these planes. And then you hear about a plane crashes into the Pentagon. And at that moment, my thought was, oh my God, we're under attack. That's what I thought immediately. I said, we're under attack. And I got to say, it was one of the most horrific, scariest moments of my life, because we didn't know who was coming from, where it was coming from, if this was just the beginning. You see and hear about war, or what we thought we knew about war, airplanes flying over, dropping bombs. I'm thinking there could be an airplane flying over where I live, 20 miles north of New York City, dropping bombs on the area, dropping bombs in New York City. No clue, really, what is going to happen. And then there's a report about the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. And now more and more information's coming in. As I'm watching the Twin Towers burning. And I remember my mother calling me. My mom calls me. And she says, do you see what's happening? She was at work. And I was very shaken up and saying, yeah, I'm watching it. And I'm looking at this. And now they're talking about people are jumping. out of the buildings. And I'm thinking, what is going on inside those buildings that people are jumping to their deaths, knowing they're jumping to their deaths because it's so hot in there, because of what they're seeing. Again, unfathomable and totally surreal. And I remember saying to my mom, Mom, the buildings are going to fall. They're going to fall down. And within minutes, the first tower collapses. And when I thought it couldn't get any more horrific, when I thought I couldn't see anything more surreal, because I already felt like I was watching a movie. This is not real life. This is not actually happening. When I thought it couldn't get any worse, probably the most horrific image, the most surreal image that I have ever seen and have ever seen in my life was seeing one tower standing on fire, burning, smoking by itself. This was a disaster movie. This is not real. This cannot be happening. I just remember watching this in awe with tears in my eyes, thinking that as that building was coming down, that there are people in that building. This is not a controlled demolition, though it looked like it. And I want to say that I've watched tons and tons of videos about the conspiracy theories and all that, and I'm not going to get into any of that. But the engineers had stated that the buildings were built that way, that they were to implode into each other if something like that were to ever happen. Not a plane hitting it, but something where the buildings were going to collapse and they would collapse into themselves. But I'd seen videos of controlled demolitions. And it's a controlled demolition. They blow up a building to put up a new building, and there's nobody in the building. And it looked like that, but my thought was, wow, there are people in there. There are people dying right now. There are people that just died in that building. And then shortly after that, the next tower collapses. And the image of smoke billowing into the air of New York City. And I remember someone on a broadcast said, the skyline of New York City has forever been changed, and our lives, as we know it, have forever been changed. And there was never a more truer statement than that. I got phone calls from people because they knew I worked in New York. A lot of them didn't know exactly where I worked. I got phone calls about other people that asking me about if they were okay because they knew that I knew they worked in New York City. They worked at the World Trade Center. If they were okay, were they there? Were they at work that day? And unfortunately, there were people that were there. And there were few that were not. Should have been at work. But they weren't, for whatever their reasons were. I know somebody that was on vacation, was supposed to be back, extended the vacation. So they were not there that day. The rest of the day was very surreal is really the only word that can come to mind of like, this is not really happening. This has to be a dream. I mean, this doesn't happen to us. More and more of the reports are coming out. This was a planned terroristic attack. Talking about the terrorist attack on U.S. soil. This doesn't happen to us. This is something that happens way, way, way far away from the United States. This happens in other countries. This happens in the Middle East. This happens everywhere else. Does not happen in the United States. And it showed how unprepared we really were that day for this type of attack. And then the days after were some of the hardest times and days that I can remember. It was still shocking. I think I was still in a shock because, again, I knew that my life as I know it is going to be different. I knew it. And I remember the next day, being Wednesday, at that point, of course, there was still a rescue effort going on at the World Trade Center. I remember calling into work and calling my boss to ask, are we open, or are we going to work today? Now, I worked in television. I worked way behind the scenes. I didn't work in an essential part of the business to where I needed to be there for news coverage or anything like that. I called my boss to ask him, like, are we open? And he said, yeah, of course we're open. Why wouldn't we be? I said, because we just got attacked? Well, we're open. I expect you to be in. Okay. I was feeling very, very uncomfortable. And quite frankly, I was scared. I fully admit it. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if it was over. I didn't know what was going on. I started driving to work. I worked in New York City. I lived 20 miles north of New York City. It took me about 45 minutes to an hour on a normal day to get into work. I remember leaving the house, and I drove about 20 minutes. And after being in the car for 20 minutes and thinking about it, I said, I'm not going in. I turned around, and I went home, and I called my boss, and I said, I'm not coming in. I don't feel comfortable. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, the Twin Towers just fell down because somebody attacked us. Am I the only one who gets this? Like the levity of this situation? And he kind of said to me, well, you know, Matt, things do happen, but we have to work through those things, and, you know, life has to move on. And I said, look, I don't feel comfortable. I'm not coming in. And he just said to me, okay, so when do you think you'll feel comfortable? And I went, I don't know. Maybe tomorrow, maybe Friday. I don't know. But I'll let you know. And that was it. I ended up going to work the next day, Thursday. And again, driving to work, crossing the George Washington Bridge, driving down the West Side Highway, I can remember hearing sirens and thinking, oh my God, what's going on? Looking up in the sky to see if something was happening. I remember I used to turn off by the Javits Center. I remember seeing tents set up with pallets of supplies, pallets of water and other supplies. I remember seeing police vehicles, sheriff cars from other states, ambulances from other states that had come in to help. I remember feeling like, where am I? Where am I? How could this be New York City? The first time seeing on the intersection of 23rd and 6th Avenue, a National Guardsman in full army fatigue with a machine gun at the intersection of 23rd Street and 6th Avenue, and thinking, what the fuck? Holy shit. This is New York City. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. I don't remember much about the morning or work. I don't remember like working that day. Like I don't know what went on. I just remember at some point going to lunch, going out of the building, and I remember walking up, I want to say 8th Avenue, because I kind of remember like the post office, and I think that's on 8th. But it was like a ghost town. Like there were bomb threats in Penn Station. It was like closed. And I just remember it felt like it was like an early Sunday morning. Like there was nobody on the streets. At least that's how I remember it. That there was nobody there. It was very quiet. And I'm standing there. I don't know what street I was on. I must have been on, I could have been on 29th, 30th, 31st, somewhere around there. And I remember seeing a guy setting up a table selling World Trade Center snow globes. And I thought, are you kidding me? It's Thursday. This happened 2 days ago. There's still a recovery effort going on. And you're profiting off of this? What's wrong with you? I didn't say anything to the guy, but that's what I was thinking. And then I just went back to work, and I remember telling people, I saw a guy selling snow globes. And they were like, really? I said, yeah, he's crazy. And then I remember the next day, and now it's Friday, September 14th. And still there's a recovery going on, or say rescue going on. I think now they were transitioning to recovery, thinking that if they do find any body, it's not going to be pretty. And I went to lunch that day, and it was just mayhem. First of all, the one thing that I did notice, and I obviously noticed this when I went back to work on Thursday, was the smell in the air. All I can think of was that I was smelling death, like smelling burning bodies. Of course, it was a combination of all sorts of things, the chemicals, the metal, toxic fumes, I'm sure, to some extent. But I just remember my thought was, this is what burning bodies must smell like, because I never smelled anything like that in my life. So on Friday, I go to lunch, and I remember walking up 6th Avenue toward Times Square. I was on 26th Street. I'd always walk up to, like, I think I used to go to this deli on 6th Avenue and like 32nd Street, somewhere around there. And there were always bootleggers on the street. You know, there was always guys selling CDs and DVDs. They'd have a blanket laid out with all the CDs and DVDs in the blanket. And whenever the cops came along, they'd grab each corner of the blanket and scoop it up and run away. Well, on Friday, September 14th, 2001, all the cops, all the police were downtown. And there were no cops midtown, uptown, barely any. And believe me, the last thing they were worrying about were bootleggers. So walking up 6th Avenue was like a flea market. You would think you were at a flea market, because it was from 26th Street all the way up to Times Square was nothing but bootleggers on the sidewalks. To where walking on the street, or on the sidewalk, I should say, it was like you were in a line. Like you could only walk behind another person. There may have been 2 lanes, but it was very crowded on the street. And I remember this so distinctly, of a guy with a T-shirt in his hand waving a shirt that had a picture of the Twin Towers on fire on the shirt, going, "I survived the attack. I survived the attack. 2 for $10. 2 for $10." And there was more than one of these guys. And I remember turning to this guy who was saying, like waving the shirt like in my face practically, going, 2 for 10, 2 for 10. I looked right at the guy, I looked right in his eyes, and I said, "You're disgusting. You are disgusting. Do you realize there are people buried right now? There are people that are dead right now, and you're selling T-shirts. You're disgusting." And the guy looked right at me and he shrugged his shoulders and looked away and went, 2 for 10, 2 for 10. And a woman that was walking in front of me turned around and said, "You're right, they are disgusting." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I remember going back to work that day, and I remember getting an order. Now, I worked, like I said, behind the scenes in television. We did a lot of work for television commercials and radio commercials, things for movies, movie commercials, radio spots for movies. And we get an order from an LA office. Now, I can't remember if it came from our LA office. I can't remember if it came directly from the person that worked for the movie company, which was Miramax. But we were to deliver these radio spots to Harvey Weinstein's house, to Harvey himself, in Westport, Connecticut. And there were radio spots for this movie called On the Line, starring Lance Bass from NSYNC. Not a good movie. About a movie that he saw a girl on a train, and then the train pulls away, and he's got to find the girl, something like that, right? So they do these radio commercials, radio spots, and Harvey Weinstein wants a copy of the spots for the movie. So we do the work. It's sometime in the afternoon. We do the work. We have to call a messenger, and they got to drive it to Harvey's house in Connecticut. Now remember, it's Friday, September 14th, 2001, 3 days after New York City was attacked. New York is in complete chaos. I call my messenger. I give him the spots, the package. He leaves. Sometime, I want to say, in the afternoon. Now, on a normal day, even for a Friday, you got to think that New York City to Westport, Connecticut is, 2 hours, something like that. So I give him the stuff, and that's the end of it. And about 10 o'clock or so, I get a phone call from the messenger service saying they're in Westport, Connecticut. They're on the street, but they can't find the house because there's no number on the actual address. It just has the name of a street and a zip code. I don't even know if there was a zip code. I think it just said the name of the street in like Westport, Connecticut, something like that. And I said, well, okay, let me look. And I looked, and that's all I had. That's exactly what I had. So I said, all right, let me call my contact in LA to find out if I can get any more information about where to send this. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because this is when I realized that unless you lived in New York, unless you worked in New York City, if you lived across the country, anywhere else, you cannot grasp what is happening. Just in the same way that I can see a hurricane on TV, like right now we have Hurricane Dorian that decimated the Bahamas, and I could see the carnage and the destruction, but it's a whole different thing when you're in the middle of it and it happened to you. And when you're on the outside of it, you don't have the same understanding. Of course, as somebody who's right in the middle of it. And this is when I realized this, when this incident happened with these radio spots. So I call this girl, that's my contact, and I say to her, look, I sent the messenger. They're on the street, but there's 2 streets. There's no number on the address that we have. Do you have a number? Do you have any more information to get these spots to where they're going, which is to Harvey Weinstein? And the girl says, no, that's all I have. And she actually read to me exactly what I had already. That's what it was. She read to me what I already had. And then she went, no, that's all I have. And then she starts in and she goes, wait a second. I put this order in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's 10 o'clock at night. Why did this take so long? Why is this taking so long to get there? You can't deliver something to Harvey Weinstein at 10 o'clock at night. And you're calling me right now, and I'm having dinner with my family. Now, I've just been through a week of absolute chaos where my world was turned upside down. And I have this girl in LA yelling at me because Harvey Weinstein doesn't have his radio spots, and that I'm interrupting her dinner with her family. And I snapped. And I said to her, do you understand that the World Trade Center fell down, the Twin Towers fell down, that New York City was attacked? Do you understand that? Do you understand that New York is an absolute mayhem? Absolute chaos is going on right now in New York City. So I am sorry that Harvey Weinstein can't get his spots right now, that it's taking this long. And that's when it clicked for her, because she went, oh, and I heard her on the phone gasp. I heard, oh my God, I am so sorry. Are you okay? Oh my God, you must know people. Do you know people that work there? I said, I did. And she's like, oh my God, I apologize. I'm so sorry. It's okay. Just please, can you get them there as soon as possible? And she just apologized profusely. And that's when I realized that if you are not here, you don't even know. You can't even grasp the gravity of this situation right now. And probably about, a half an hour later, I got a call from the messenger service that the spots were delivered. And that was the end of that. The aftermath, the weeks later, were a little crazy as well. I moved to Jersey City, and I was walking. I lived very close to the PATH station at Journal Square, and I'd walk there every day. And I'd walk right past National Guardsmen with machine guns, big army truck on the outside. I'd get inside. There'd be guards standing inside. There'd be guards in the station by the tracks. Again, once you got into the city, guards in the subway, guards on the street, National Guard with machine guns. Again, where am I living? And then it became sort of normal. You kind of got used to it. But I never, to this day, can bring myself to go down there. I've been down there once, and it was not on purpose. I had gone down there because I was on the PATH train, and something happened with the station, not the World Trade Center station. They opened that, but something was going on with the trains, and they had to reroute. And I remember being on the train, and it went by the site. And at this point, they'd already started the rebuilding. So there was a big hole in the ground with the wiring and the framing of the building. And that's what I saw. And the PATH went kind of right by it. And And to this day, that was the only time I have ever been down to the area. It just brings a lot of emotion to me. I think I'm not the only person that feels this way. It kind of got to me when I would hear people come to New York and say, "Oh, I want to go down to Ground Zero. I want to go down to the site," and it kind of gave me a sick feeling. And still, I have no desire really to go down there. I just don't. Maybe one day I will, but right now, I still don't. And we're talking, 18 years later, and I still have not been there and don't want to go down there. It's a tough day for all of us. I think, especially those of us who live in New York or lived in New York. Now that I'm in New Jersey, and worked in the city that day, and it's a day that we're always going to remember as a pivotal moment in our history. Not just American history, of course, but in our life, our lifetimes. I mean, now we're at war. We've been fighting a war for the past decade and a half now. Growing up, we didn't have that. We didn't deal with that stuff. This is now normal. And to think that somebody flew planes into two of the most iconic buildings in the United States and wanted to hurt us and killed innocent people is still a little crazy to think about. I always think on this day of a person that I did know, and honestly, I met him once. The guy gave me a ride to the train station a few weeks before the attack happened. He worked in the World Trade Center. I also remember Tom Foley, a firefighter who I went to school with. He was a year older than me. I did not know him very well. I remember him in elementary school, through high school. The year before, he was in People magazine as one of the most eligible bachelors. And he died that day trying to rescue people. So I do always think of Tom Foley. And other people that I know of that have lost people due to illness, suffered for years with an illness they contracted from working at the site, and now they've died. And there's still ongoing arguments about aid to the families of these victims. There shouldn't even be any fight. I don't know why there is, but there is. And that still goes on to this day. So I just wanted to share my thoughts with you of what I remember on that day and how it played out for me. And it's a day that I will never forget, and it's something that I reflect upon every year on this day.